"You're nothing," she hissed, her voice cutting through the store. The bystanders watched the woman stumble, their cameras hungry for the shame. They thought they were watching a weak, old lady lose. They didn't realize they were watching Brenda Howard pull the pin on a grenade that was about to vaporize her career, her bank account, and her future in under 60 seconds. The story is just getting interesting, and the justice is only beginning. We want to hear from our global community. Where are you watching from? Get your hands off that device right now. Brenda's voice didn't just carry. It sliced through the air like a blade, stopping every customer in their tracks. Before Ruth could even process the sound, Brenda was in her space, her chest heaving and her finger pointed directly between Ruth's eyes. "I saw you. You're smudging the screen with those hands. Can't you see the premium sign, or do you just not care about things you can't afford?" Ruth flinched, her hands flying up to cover her ears as the volume of the assault registered. She stumbled back, her heel catching on the edge of a floor tile, nearly sending her to the ground. She gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up, her glasses slightly lopsided, trying to find a face that looked sympathetic, but all she saw was a wall of glowing screens and cold eyes. I was just checking the weight," Ruth managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "I wanted to see if it would be too heavy for my grandson's bag." "The weight? You think I'm an idiot?" Brenda sneered, stepping even closer until Ruth could smell the sharp, artificial scent of her perfume. "People like you don't buy these. You come in here to enjoy the air conditioning and get your fingerprints over technology that costs more than your monthly pension. Look at this." Brenda grabbed the tablet from the stand and held it up like a piece of evidence, pointing at a faint, oily mark on the glass. "You've just devalued this floor model. Do you have any idea how much work it takes to keep this store looking professional?" By now, the circle had formed. A group of teenagers near the headphone display pulled out their phones, the lenses reflecting the harsh overhead lights as they started recording. A man in a suit a few feet away didn't step in. He just leaned against a counter and let out a short, mocking laugh. "Some people just don't know where they belong," he whispered to the person next to him, loud enough for Ruth to hear. "I have the money to pay for it," Ruth said, her voice growing a fraction firmer, though her hands were still shaking. Brenda let out a dry, hacking laugh that drew more stares. "With what? Spare change from your grocery budget? Don't lie to me. I've been in sales for 10 years, and I know a buyer when I see one. You're a loiterer. You're a distraction. And frankly, you're making the real customers uncomfortable." Brenda turned to the crowd, her face morphing into a performative mask of professional frustration. "I'm sorry you all have to witness this. We try to maintain a certain standard here at the boutique, but sometimes people think they can just wander in and treat our inventory like a flea market." She turned back to Ruth, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "Now get out, before I call security and have you banned from the entire mall. Move it." Ruth stood there for a second, the heat of humiliation rising in her neck. She looked at the phones pointed at her, at the laughing strangers, and finally at Brenda's arrogant, self-assured face. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply reached up, straightened her glasses, and gripped her small purse tightly. She didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. She turned around and walked toward the glass doors, the sound of Brenda's voice still echoing behind her, telling the real customers that the problem had been handled. Ruth didn't say a word as she walked toward the heavy glass doors, her pulse still drumming in her fingertips. She had spent 40 years in classrooms where the air was thick with the energy of 30 restless teenagers at a time, and if there was one thing she had mastered, it was the power of a strategic pause. She knew exactly how to handle a bully. She had seen them in the form of 8th-grade boys hiding behind bravado and in the form of school board members hiding behind suits. Brenda Howard was just another version of a familiar pattern, someone using volume to mask a lack of substance. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the humidity of the afternoon hit her, but she didn't stop to rest. In her decades as an educator, Ruth had learned that dignity wasn't something someone could take from you. It was something you chose to set down. And she wasn't setting hers down for a sales manager who didn't know the first thing about character. She remembered a boy named Randall back in 1994, a kid who had thrown a desk across her room in a fit of rage, screaming similar insults at her. She hadn't screamed back then, either. She had waited. She had looked him in the eye until the fire in him ran out of oxygen. By the end of that semester, Randall was the one staying late to help her clap chalkboard erasers. That experience had taught her that people who shout are usually the ones most afraid of being ignored. Brenda wanted a reaction. She wanted Ruth to beg, to cry, or to cause a scene that would justify the security guard's intervention. By remaining silent, Ruth had kept the upper hand. She wasn't just a retired lady in a denim shirt. She was a woman who had seen the rise and fall of neighborhood dynasties and understood that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Her mind shifted to the grandson she was doing this for. He was the first in their family to get into a top-tier engineering program, and he needed a machine that could keep up with his potential. He didn't need the image of the showroom. He needed the hardware. Ruth felt the weight of the envelope in her purse. The savings from years of modest living and smart, quiet investments she'd made back when the city was still growing. She wasn't poor, but she was practiced in the art of being invisible. It was a tactical advantage she had used many times to observe the true nature of people before she decided to do business with them. Brenda had failed that test within 60 seconds. As Ruth crossed the street, leaving the sleek, sterile environment behind, she didn't feel defeated. She felt focused. She knew that respect was earned through service and patience, not by wearing a blazer and a headset. She looked across the road at a smaller shop with a flickering sign, a place that didn't have a greeter at the door or a polished floor, but had the one thing the big showroom lacked, a sense of human decency. The bell above the door gave a light, tinny ring as Ruth pushed her way into the small shop. The air inside didn't smell like expensive floor wax or ozone. It smelled like solder and old dust. It was a narrow space, crowded with stacks of cardboard boxes and a long workbench covered in tiny screws and disemboweled keyboards. Behind the counter sat a young man, probably no older than 20, wearing a plain black t-shirt and thick-rimmed glasses. He looked up from a circuit board he was probing and immediately set his tools down. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, standing up with a genuine, tired smile. "I'm Leo. How can I help you today?" Ruth paused, her hand still tight on her purse, half expecting another lecture about fingerprints or her denim jacket. "I'm looking for a tablet," she said cautiously. "A high-end one, something that can handle heavy engineering software." Leo didn't look at her clothes. He didn't scan her for a watch or jewelry. He just nodded thoughtfully, leaning his elbows on the laminate counter. "Engineering? That's a tall order for a tablet, but there are a couple of models that can handle CAD and 3D modeling if they have the right processor. Is it for you, or a gift?" "For my grandson," Ruth replied, feeling the tension in her shoulders finally begin to give way. "He's starting university in the fall." "That's a big deal." "Congratulations to him," Leo said. He walked over to a glass case that was clean but lacked the blinding spotlights of the store across the street. He didn't try to upsell her on the most expensive item right away. Instead, he pointed to a sturdy, matte black device. If he's going to be in labs and moving around a lot, he doesn't just need power. He needs something that won't shatter the first time it bumps a desk. This one here has the same internals as the flashy silver ones, but the casing is much more durable. He pulled the device out and set it on a soft microfiber mat on the counter. "Go ahead, try the interface. It's got a high refresh rate, so the stylus input feels just like a pen on paper. I know it looks a bit plain compared to the ones in the big showrooms, but it's a workhorse." Ruth reached out, her fingers hovering for a second before she touched the screen. She looked at Leo, waiting for the snap of a voice or a look of judgment. It never came. Leo just waited patiently, watching her with a look of professional interest. "It feels solid," Ruth noted, swiping through the menu. "It is," Leo agreed. "And if anything goes wrong, I'm right here. You don't have to book an appointment 3 weeks out or talk to a corporate bot. I fix what I sell." Ruth looked at the young man, seeing the faint dark circles under his eyes and the way he treated his inventory with a quiet respect. This was a man building a future, one repair at a time. She thought about the phones recording her humiliation across the street and then looked at the calm, honest face in front of her. "You're very kind, Leo," she said softly. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he replied. "It's not every day someone comes in looking for the good stuff. I appreciate the interest." Ruth didn't mention the other store. She didn't need to. She simply felt the weight of the envelope in her bag and knew exactly where that money was going to land. Leo was finishing his explanation of the tablet's processing speed when Ruth pulled the thick, plain envelope from her bag. She didn't open it yet. She just let it rest on the counter between them. Leo stopped talking, his eyes moving from the envelope to Ruth's face. He didn't look greedy, just curious. "I appreciate the time you took with me, Leo," Ruth said, her voice steady and warm. "Most people see a woman my age in denim and think I'm just looking for a way to pass the time. They think I don't understand the specs or the price tag. But I've spent my life teaching children that the most important things are often the ones you have to look twice at to see clearly." Leo leaned back slightly, a small, humble smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "My mom always said the loudest person in the room is the one with the least to say. I just wanted to make sure you got the right tool for your grandson." Ruth nodded, tapping the envelope. "He's a good boy. He'll use it well. But as I sat here watching you work, I kept thinking about his classmates. I taught at the local high school for 40 years. I know exactly which kids have the brains, but don't have the gear. They're starting off the race 10 paces behind everyone else just because their families can't drop $2,000 on a screen." Leo's expression softened. "I was one of those kids," he admitted quietly. "I had to build my first computer out of parts one found in a literal dumpster." "Then you understand why I'm doing this," Ruth said. She slid the envelope across the counter toward him. "I came in here to buy one for my grandson. But after the way I was treated across the street, and after seeing the way you run this shop, I've made a decision. I'm not buying one." Leo looked confused for a split second, his hand hovering over the envelope. "I need 20, Ruth stated firmly. "The top-tier model we discussed. The ones with the durable casing and the expanded memory. I want them set up and ready for the graduating honors class at the district school." Leo froze. He didn't move for several heartbeats. "Ma'am, 20? That's a massive order. I'd have to call my supplier, but I could have them here by Tuesday." "Tuesday is fine," Ruth replied. "I'm paying in full, in cash, right now. I want the commission to stay with you, and I want the devices to go to those kids." Leo slowly opened the envelope. His breath hitched as he saw the organized stacks of bills. It wasn't just a sale. It was enough to pay his shop's rent for a year and upgrade his own equipment. His hands shook slightly as he began to count, not because he didn't trust her, but because the weight of the moment was finally hitting him. "You're serious," he whispered, looking up at her. "I've never been more serious in my life," Ruth said, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "There's a lot of power in being underestimated, Leo. It lets you see who people really are when they think you have nothing to offer them." She looked out the window toward the shining glass of the showroom across the street, where Brenda was likely still preening for the cameras. Ruth knew that a storm was coming for that store, but for now, she was content to sit in the quiet warmth of Leo's shop and watch a young man's life change for the better. Ruth didn't wait until she got home. She stood right there in the center of Leo's modest shop, pulled a sleek, high-end smartphone from her pocket, the kind Brenda assumed she didn't know how to turn on, and scrolled through her contacts until she found a private mobile number. She hit dial and put the phone to her ear, her eyes fixed on the bright, cold storefront across the street. "Hello, Julian. It's Ruth Thompson," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of professional authority that would have made Brenda's blood run cold. On the other end, Julian, the regional director for the tech franchise, sat up straighter in his chair. Ruth wasn't just a name on a ledger. She was one of the 3 primary seed investors who had funded the city's expansion 5 years ago. "Ruth, always a pleasure," Julian said, his tone warm but curious. "What can I do for you this afternoon?" "I'm standing across from your flagship branch right now," Ruth said, her words measured and sharp. "And I just had a very illuminating experience. I went in to purchase a graduation gift for my grandson. I was dressed for a day of gardening and errands, and within 60 seconds of entering, I was physically shoved, verbally abused, and threatened with security by a manager named Brenda Howard. There was a dead silence on the line. Ruth could hear the sound of Julian's pen hitting his desk. She called me a loiterer, Julian. She told me I didn't belong in a premium environment. And the most concerning part wasn't just her behavior. It was the fact that the entire store staff stood by and watched while she humiliated a customer for touching a display unit. People were filming it. It will likely be on the internet by tonight. Ruth, I don't know what to say. This is a total violation of every protocol we have, Julian stammered, his voice tight with panic. It's a violation of human decency, Ruth corrected him. I've just spent $40,000 in cash at a small independent shop across the street called Leo's Tech. I'm buying 20 units for the local honors class. That's a sale your branch lost because your manager decided she was the gatekeeper of who looks wealthy enough to breathe your air. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Julian said, his voice now cold and focused. Please, Ruth, don't leave the area. I'm not going anywhere, Ruth replied. I'm going to stay right here with Leo. I'd like you to see what real customer service looks like. And Julian, don't bother calling Brenda's office first. I want to see the look on her face when she realizes who she was screaming at. Ruth ended the call and tucked the phone away. She looked at Leo, who was still staring at the stacks of cash on his counter. The regional director is coming over, she said with a small, knowing smile. I think it's time we showed them how a real business is run. Julian didn't even go to his own store first. He pulled his car up to the curb in front of Leo's shop, stepped out, and walked straight toward Ruth. He looked at the modest interior, then at Leo, and finally at Ruth, who was sitting calmly on a stool by the workbench. Before Julian could speak, Ruth pointed across the street. Brenda was standing behind the glass of the flagship store, looking triumphant as she chatted with a coworker, likely recounting how she had cleaned up the showroom floor earlier that hour. I want you to see this through, Julian, Ruth said, her voice like iron. They walked across the street together, Leo trailing slightly behind, still looking stunned by the speed of the afternoon. As they entered the boutique, the chimes signaled their arrival. Brenda looked up, a professional smile ready for a man in an expensive suit like Julian, but the smile curdled the moment she saw Ruth standing beside him. Sir, you're here, Brenda said, stepping forward, pointedly ignoring Ruth. I'm so glad you dropped by. I actually just had to handle a bit of a security issue with a vagrant. A vagrant? Julian interrupted, his voice dangerously low. Brenda, do you have any idea who this woman is? Brenda flicked a glance at Ruth's denim shirt and smirked. She's a loiterer who was smudging the Titan displays. I had to escort her out for the sake of the brand. This woman is Ruth Thompson, Julian said, and the silence that followed was absolute. She is one of the 3 people who signed the checks that allowed us to open this location. She owns more of this brand than you will ever earn in 10 lifetimes. The color drained from Brenda's face so fast it looked like she might faint. She looked at Ruth, then back at Julian, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. The teenagers who had been filming earlier were still there, their phones out again, but this time the lens was focused on Brenda's crumbling expression. I don't just invest in buildings, Brenda, Ruth said, stepping closer. I invest in people. And today, I saw that you are a very poor investment. You didn't see a customer. You saw a target for your own insecurities. Julian didn't wait for an explanation. Give me your keys and your badge, Brenda. You're done. Human Resources will mail your final check. You are barred from this property effectively immediately. As security escorted a sobbing Brenda toward the back, Ruth turned to Julian and Leo. She didn't want an apology. She wanted a solution. Julian, I'm withdrawing my support for this branch's exclusive contract with the school district. From now on, Leo's shop is the official supplier and service center for the district's technology needs. He's already shown me he knows how to treat the community with the respect they deserve. Leo's eyes widened as the realization hit him. He wasn't just getting a one-time sale. He was getting a career-defining contract. Ruth walked back toward the door, stopping only to look at the display tablet she had touched earlier. She didn't touch it this time. She just looked at her reflection in the glass and then at the staff who had stood by and watched. Arrogance is a very expensive habit, she said to the room. And today, the bill finally came due. She walked out into the sunlight, heading back to Leo's to finish the paperwork, leaving the premium store behind in a silence that was finally, truly respectful. Mrs. Ruth Thompson didn't just walk away with 20 tablets. She walked away with the knowledge that she had protected her community's future. By choosing to empower a small business like Leo's, she proved that true influence isn't about the volume of your voice or the price of your suit. It's about the integrity of your actions. Brenda Howard learned the hardest lesson of all. When you treat people like they are nothing, you eventually find yourself with nothing. Respect costs you nothing to give, but as Brenda discovered, arrogance can cost you everything. If this story reminded you that character always outshines a designer label, show some love by hitting the like button. We bring you powerful, real-world stories of justice and triumph. Don't miss our next video. Click subscribe and turn on notifications to join our community of storytellers. Until next time, remember, stay humble, stay kind, and never judge a book by its cover. Thanks for watching.